Hey Doc, you see my shirt? Youth recycling.
Yeah, what is that?
Do you people see youth recycling here?
I see that, but what is it?
Yes. Each one teach
It's
one.
an organization that Lev Wells and Chief Bell created.
Oh.
Okay. We are live on Facebook.
Yeah, because
so
Chief
you're
Bell,
on.
Lev Wells and Chief Bell created this.
We're live.
Each one teach one.
We're live, Dr. Wanzo.
Okay. Good evening.
That Lev Wells and Chief Bell created.
Oh, okay. Good evening. You're listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEGTalkRadio.com. Click live stream tab or watch us live on your smart TV. YouTube at WCEG Network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your show host of Mind Matters for the next 1, possibly 2 hours. We're the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG Network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support. Good evening. Welcome to Mind Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Cassandra Wanzo. I'm a psychiatrist and I've been practicing in the Atlanta area for the past 29 years. Our co-host is Officer Paul DesVignes, who has more than 20 years in law enforcement experience. We're affectionately known as the Doc and the Cop. Hi, Paul. Hi, Paul. Oh, yeah, I think he's on mute. Paul, yes.
That's me, Doc.
Okay.
Hey, everybody.
Okay, and we welcome back now our regular guest.
WCEG land.
Okay. We welcome back our regular guest, Norman Carter Jr., a former Army veteran and retired corporal with the Philadelphia Police Department. He has written a powerful book called The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop, which is available on Amazon.
Thank you.
Our topic this evening is, what about Black on Black homicide? Again, what about Black on Black homicide? In part 1, when we discussed this topic, a lot of discussion was generated. At the time of the first show, I had just experienced the senseless murder of my 20-year-old cousin, Austin Wanzo, by another 20-year-old African-American male. I attended the funeral. It was so heartbreaking. And I visited the site where he died on the street after being shot in the back. This show is dedicated to Austin Wanzo. What about Black on Black homicide? As I stated in the first show, the phrase itself is very loaded. It has been used by white supremacists and the right to deflect from the issues of police abuse and the Black Lives Matter movement. There is no reason that we can't acknowledge the Black on Black homicide problem and address issues like police abuse. Let me repeat that. There's no reason that we can't acknowledge the Black on Black homicide problem and address police abuse issues. So I'd like to start with Norm and see what kind of information he has to share.
Oh, well, oops, thank you. Thank you so much. Getting into this topic is really heavy, and it comes up with so much information that even I was not aware of. And those of you who know me know that I am very active in discussing, revealing, and explaining things about police corruption and police abuse of authority, which is definitely a big problem. But when I began to do research for this presentation, I went to the Federal Uniform Crime Reports back to 2013. And consistently from 2013 until 2018, when all reports are available, the 2019 report is not yet available. But the homicide rates are consistent through that time. And as a classic example, although we, and African Americans, comprise 13% of the population, we commit 48.36 to between that and 47% consistently every year of all homicide victims.
Please repeat that. Repeat that,
Yes,
please.
consistently between 2014, let me correct that, 2014 and 2018, we are between 47.5% and 48.3% of all homicide victims are African American, and yes, most homicide crimes and other crimes are interracial, but 88, nearly almost 90% of the perpetrators of black homicides are other black people. But being 13% of the population of this United States, but responsible for 48.36 in 2017.
Wow.
That's just horrendous. That's not a hoax. That's not diminishing anything about the preponderance or the existence of police brutality and police homicides. That is factual, and we can deal with that. But we cannot ignore something that I have documentation here that was even reported back as far as 1899, about black on black homicides. It's been a problem that we as a people refuse to deal with. We absolutely refuse to deal with it, and we deflect onto other things. And I think the part of the genesis of our conversation here was Officer Paul several weeks ago bringing up the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. And this is the elephant in the room. And because of his statement along that, based on his experience as a police officer, we began to delve into this. And this is one of the initial findings in that research.
So Paul, what are your thoughts?
You know, I'm going to provide the look from a layman's term point of view. I'm going to go outside of the analytical of the numbers and tell you on the streets, streets are dangerous, and they always have been. People make a mistake and say, well, you know, this generation and that generation. No, it's always been a cycle in a Black community. We keep forgetting slavery officially ended in 1865. I'm sorry, the Civil War ended in 1865. But the violence of slave populations, or I said Black settlements, really grew. And the reason why, you know, all the vices that we were not allowed prior to being into servitude literally exploded. You know, people keep forgetting prostitution is not new. Gambling is not new. A couple of decades later, number running was real big long before the narcotic trade hit. We all remember the blaxploitation movies back in the days in the 50s and 60s and going into the 70s, where the most powerful criminal figure in the Black community was the pimp. Well, from the 80s up, the pimp was replaced by the drug dealer. But one thing that we cannot ignore is the homicide rates in our community, as Norm said, has been so consistent because we have been our own worst enemy and continue to be so.
I saw something on CNN on one of the shows.
What do you think, Doc?
On one of the shows, they were saying that gun violence has been surging in cities. It's in hitting communities of color especially hard. And the statistics that they quoted on this particular show, it said as of July 5th, these statistics that gun violence was up, let's see, 53% in New York, 23% in Atlanta, and 46% in Chicago. So what's going on?
I think one of the problems we have is the proliferation.
Well, let me just say this.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Before we even address that, go ahead. Yeah, you're right. Gun sales had went through the roof. Guns and ammo right now, there's a shortage nationwide. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think his sound is a little off.
Right. And Norm, you were about to say something. What were you about to say?
Yeah, one of the problems is,
Gun sales.
yeah, and I'm going to an example of what we had just last night here in Atlanta, where there was a shooting and there were bullets all over the place. I mean, people are not just using 6-shooters or knives like probably back in the old days. People are using war weapons. They have access to these, and you have people who are in love with these. It's kind of hard to explain it, but they're in love with the power that that they have with these weapons. And when you have that, you notice this a lot with the people from the NRA. This becomes almost a sickness or an obsession. So your first means of retaliation, where back many years ago it used to be a fist fight. Now it's, okay, I'm going to go get my AK-47 and I'm going to shoot it. And there's a lot of that. If you notice, there's been a preponderance of gun shops being broken into all over the country. And that plus the fact that the justice system is slow. In fact, the justice system is not always responsive to the needs of the community. I remember as a kid growing up in North Philadelphia, the word always around was, we used to say, well, you know, a white person gets life imprisonment for something, for a homicide, and maybe a black person gets 5 years or 10 years. And the perception is that life in the black community is cheap. They don't care. Well, let's just dispense with this as fast as we can. That was a problem many years ago. But now, I just think that, and I was reading an article here, a very extensive article about even the no snitch rule. I don't want to read a whole lot into it, but one of the things that it says is that the urban violence is deplored by the black community, but at the same time, it is enabled by a culture of non-cooperation. And a lot of that non-cooperation is due to people not trusting the police and the fear of retaliation within the community. So I think those are the reasons why this problem not only exists, but continues to rise exponentially in our communities.
Blacks were given less sentences, less time, did you say?
Well, this was many years, this was the
Okay.
perception that,
Okay.
you know, and I think a lot of that grew out of, you know, someone committing a crime and then getting released on bail, and then the time lag between the crime and the time of the court case and possible incarceration gives the perception that, well, nothing's happening with this. Or you'll have with the people committing a crime and the whole neighborhood knows who did it, but nobody's talking.
Okay. Well, I know
That type of thing.
you said even though like blacks make up 13% of the population, we're 40% of the prison population.
Yeah, well, yes. And that's also a problem. A lot of it is, and this has been proven, that not having access due to economic conditions to the best legal representation prior to trial could be a reason for that. And the mandatory sentencing rule and people are getting caught up in drugs. You know, there's always been shown that there are disproportionate penalties for people who use crack cocaine as opposed to people who use or deal with cocaine, pure cocaine. So the perception is that there's a definite racial connection to that.
And that's part of the whole systematic racism.
Correct.
Paul, like, yeah.
Huh. Wow. History doesn't lie, does it?
No.
History does not lie. It's funny, I remember I was in middle school when crack hit in the northeast corner of the tri-state area, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. And you know, prior to crack becoming king, heroin was a big deal. Heroin was one of those type drugs that it was nothing to see a junkie in the projects who OD where he was sitting with the needle still sticking in his arm. I remember we thought it was a novelty. Hey, come see so-and-so died. And we were so desensitized to violence and the death that comes with it that it was more of entertainment than it was a reality of life. Or should I say a scare straight tactics. It's amazing how I see these programs where they try to do or been involved in scare straight to inner city kid that already seen it all and done it all by the time they hit middle school. So how are you going to scare somebody who've already seen death, you know? But it's wild because now we're at a point where we're still trying to deal with a problem that's age-old and we still haven't got a resolution. I think the biggest problem right now is the Black community not stepping forward and taking responsibility for the things that we do to one another.
Absolutely.
See, it's easy to promote and push Black Lives Matter against other races and look at violations and atrocities against Black people and say, this gives us reason to do what we do. But it's amazing how we accept, tolerate, and in some cases condone crimes against one another, especially homicide rates that makes no sense. For every one young Black person killed by a law enforcement officer, we got on an average 150 plus killed by each other. I don't even see how we can even remotely accept those numbers and think, well, that's just the way it is. But we do.
I can give you an example of just what you're talking about, how things aren't fair. About 3 years ago, maybe 4, there was a 11 or 12-year-old boy, I believe in Cincinnati, who was brandishing a
Toy gun.
a toy gun.
Tamir Rice.
Yes,
Tamir Rice.
right.
Tamir Rice.
He was brandishing a toy gun that people in the community thought was a real gun.
Mhm.
The police pull up and they killed it. They killed the young boy.
Within a matter of seconds. Within a matter of seconds.
Yes. Now, and there was national outrage,
Mhm.
absolute national outrage.
Mhm.
Black Lives Matter people all over the country were outraged and demonstrating about this. And on the media, you had all sorts of so-called leaders on TV talking about this and how outrageous the behavior was, wanting to arrest the police and all of this. Shortly thereafter, there was a 10-year-old boy in Chicago who was assassinated by a group of gang members. And the reason for them assassinating this 10-year-old boy was because these gang members couldn't get to this 10-year-old boy's father.
Wow.
So they
That's
killed this 10-year-old boy. Not one black, quote, leader spoke up. Not
I didn't hear about that. You're right. I didn't hear about that.
No, Dorm, I'm aware of it, Doc, and he's right. Not
I didn't hear about
one.
it though. I didn't hear about it.
NAACP, silent.
I didn't hear about that.
SCLU, Black
Yes.
Lives Matter.
Silent.
You not one word.
I didn't hear about it.
Okay, then Doc, let me support Norm. We had an 8-year-old girl right here in Atlanta, Georgia,
Yes.
less than a month ago.
Sequoia
Shot and
Taylor.
killed.
Sequoia
University
Taylor.
in Pryor.
Yes, Sequoia Taylor.
Same scenario.
Mhm.
This child was assassinated by so-called Black revolutionaries. What do we hear from our leadership?
Here's
Where's
the unsettling part about that. If you listen to the mother, who was very, very, very upset, very, very shackled by emotion, but she tried to speak. And one of the things she said was, somebody knows who did.
Yes.
She said, and what was key, she said, there was a woman taking pictures.
Oh.
There was a woman taking pictures
Wow.
of the incident.
Wow.
Nothing happened.
Wow.
To as far as I know, whoever that woman is hasn't stepped up. So again, we go back to this, and there's like a $20,000 reward out right now for
I think
this.
it went to 50,000.
It's 50,000. That's kind of enough for you to step forward, keep your mouth shut, and then move out of the neighborhood, if that's what you're worried about.
And here's the key to that. And this is what upsets me, because I worked that area during that whole riot situation. I worked that area when there were multiple shootings leading up. First of all, the problem why this 8-year-old dead, I left this directly on the hands of Keisha Lance Bottom, the mayor of Atlanta. We had 3 weeks prior to the shooting of this young lady, this young girl, she didn't have to die. If the mayor would have stepped forward and put some kind of presence, and she's going to run the police department, then she need to have those under her. Day one, we're not talking about these were peaceful Black Lives Matter demonstrators that I met across the spectrum in these last 2 or 3 months, who I really respected and appreciated. These were local neighborhood thugs who took over a community.
Exactly.
Terrorizing the very citizens of that community. And they openly carried firearms, and the use of drugs and alcohol was so rampant in their lawlessness. Why did this mayor ignore previous shootings and fights among this group and the intimidation created in this neighborhood? Each day they were allowed to become more brazen in their activity. They stepped it up another level. We had shootings prior to the death of the beautiful 8-year-old that shouldn't be alive today. But yet now you look at the cowards who call themselves organizations of this, the leaders of this so-called motley crew of criminals who took over University in Pryor. And it shows just how cowardly they are and how much they really didn't care about Black Lives Matter, because they should immediately stepped up when they realized what took place and said, hey, we made a mistake. It's funny how they claim they were out there protesting in support of Black Lives Matter, but yet, like cowards, they ran and hide when they took a Black life innocently. So you were never a leader, nor were you a peaceful demonstrator. You were armed thugs that showed that you were career criminals. And you set back the Black Lives Matter movement probably another decade now, because it just shows that statistics state as criminals, you took advantage of an opportunity to be lawlessness that really was a peaceful demonstration. And there's nothing I respected about any of these people down at University of Pryor from day one. Intimidation, fear, terrorism, and rampant drug and alcohol use is what they were promoting. It had nothing to do with peaceful Black Lives Matter.
Actually, my son went down there and he saw people armed, and he was in the process of taking pictures and was almost attacked and left that right after, that was before the young lady was killed, but it was definitely a criminal element. He said he didn't see police anywhere down there.
Well, this was the incident where we had on video that you sent out, correct?
Yes,
right. Where there was a young girl got shot by
an Indian girl from India, right?
Nothing happened, and as Officer Paul just said, you cannot surrender a neighborhood. You can, and this happened in Seattle.
Okay.
It happened here in Georgia. Yeah, I understand your right to protest peacefully, but during this time, prior to this 8-year-old girl being killed, from what I understand, neighbors in that community and business people in that community were complaining
absolutely
about the people walking down the streets and the intimidation and the fact that people were being challenged whenever they came into that neighborhood. I had a church member who was the day before this young girl was shot, exactly the same spot. Him and his son were challenged. They just wanted to come down and see what was going on. And they were challenged by these guys walking around with rifles. And it's unsettling.
Thugs.
It's uncalled for. It's uncalled for. And you cannot shirk your responsibility as a government leader when you surrender the safety of that community to thugs.
So what do you think about number 45 sending in federal troops like to Seattle, and he's supposed to be sending them to Chicago?
And see, and this is where I want to add on to Norm real quick. Before we even talk about the president and what his leadership is, let's look at local leadership, because we fail to always hold local leadership responsible. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms had blood on her hands because of the death of this young girl. I don't care what President Trump did on his level. I really had no concern for our president governor until he did the same thing with the state National Guard to protect federal property as well as the Capitol itself. And why? Because local law enforcement leadership is so incompetent right now. And a mayor who's responsible for protecting all citizens within the jurisdiction of the city of Atlanta has shown she doesn't have leadership capability. I don't understand why people keep talking about her as a VP candidate. Her lack of leadership, especially in times of crisis, has shown to be worse than what Hillary Clinton was during the Benghazi situation. We're looking at right now where she's failed to adequately take control of a city under siege. Do you know we're averaging 2 to 3 murders a night in Atlanta right now? And just this previous night, there were 4 murders, 2 on the expressway and 2 at a recording studio. Right. All of them Black males.
Morning at the recording studio,
At what point do we start focusing on the local leadership and stop being concerned? Because right now, Atlanta is in a state of emergency. The governor has already brought in the National Guard. If President Trump turns around and decides through the Department of Homeland Security to send federal units in here, I think that's what needs to be done.
Really?
I support that fully because there's no...
Like Seattle, huh? Be another,
there's no competent leadership in the city of Atlanta right now for law enforcement. These shootings have become so rampant and commonplace. Every last one of us, whether you live in Atlanta or not, is threatened. And unfortunately, because of proliferation of guns and the access. And people need to remember this key point. That young man is in custody right now for the shooting as one of the suspects in the shooting of the 8-year university in Pryor is 20 years old, which means under federal law, he's not even legal to have a pistol, much less own one. So you got to ask yourself, where did he get the firearm from? He's already in legal possession of a firearm. He's already had a history, a criminal history already relating to violence and threats and theft. So at this point, why are we even wasting ourselves trying to figure out where did it go wrong when we know we had one person in custody who definitely was illegal in possession of a firearm even before the young lady was killed? This is where a competent law enforcement agent, when you put that press on them, because they know names.
The mayor of Portland saying sending the troops is making the situation worse.
Let me tell you,
that's what the mayor of Portland said today.
I'm not even concerned about the mayor of Portland because this is the city of Atlanta.
Right,
and right now, Atlanta's under.
I mean, if they send troops into like Chicago or here, the same thing will happen.
And troops need to be in Atlanta right now because there's no competent law enforcement and a murder rate is surging. And tonight's show is about saving Black lives. Well, let me tell you, saving Black lives mean we have to now get somebody else to police our community because we're not doing it.
Okay, so we can talk about the problems all day. What can we do? What's the solution?
The solution is right there. First of all, we need competent law enforcement leadership who's going to take control. We need political leaders now who's stepping forward, as Norm said, address that elephant in the room. Now that we need to crack down on black crime, especially this homicide rate. We need to turn around, turn to our law enforcement agency, say, listen, we're not going to prosecute you for doing your job as long as it's within the policy and procedure, but we under siege.
So unfortunately, back up. So we should send federal troops into all Black communities? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not saying anything about all Black communities. I'm talking about using federal resources at this point with your local, and even if you have to come in, and if the government declares the state with a state of emergency, which he has, that clears the way not only for National Guard, but as well as federal troops. Do I think it's necessary? Yes, because you have a police department in the city of Atlanta PD now that's no longer effective. And it's not because the officers not, and it's not because of the officers, it's because of poor leadership and political leadership.
Can I give you an example of where that could be a slippery slope? You might be too young to remember, but about 30 years ago in Virginia Beach, the people who was responsible for the Freaknik here in Atlanta,
yes,
it used to be held at Virginia Beach.
Yes.
And just as it did in Atlanta, it started to get out of control every year. So one particular year, the problem was so bad that the police couldn't handle it. So they called in the National Guard. And what happened is the National Guard went in there, and as we used to say in Philly, they made clubs Trump. They beat up everybody. Anybody on the street, if you were told to move and you didn't move right away, okay, you got a nightstick across the head, you were likely to get arrested. And so what happened after that, there was such a public outcry about that they decided that they would never do that again. They would ask for, if anything, police or state police to come in rather than call in federal troops. And the other part about that is, and I agree that crime might be getting out of hand, but now instead of abdicating responsibility taking responsibility away from the government leader, we should be putting more pressure on them, because you don't want federal troops to come in, because what you're going to have is you're going to have a situation where you're very close to martial law.
Exactly.
And the consequences of martial law is you're standing, if the mayor issues an order or the government, federal government says an order, nobody carries any guns on the street, and someone is suspected of having a gun or has an open gun, they can be shot and killed just for suspicion of having a gun,
Mhm.
you lose all of your civil rights.
Exactly.
You lose all of your civil rights.
Exactly.
You have no redress in the courts once you establish a situation where martial law is in place. So again, number one, we have to put more pressure on the government leaders, and if they're not acting right, call them out on it and make them act right. The other part of this is our so-called African American leaders throughout the country, the ones who find a microphone every time there's a police shooting. Those need to be the people who step before the cameras and get together and get the companies, the country, the communities to voice their outrage at black on black crime. Right now, there's not one national leader, nationally recognized leader, or nationally recognized government leader in the legislature or in the Congress that is out there on the microphone telling people, we had enough of this crime in our community.
Absolutely.
We need to step up and speak up. This is across the United States nation. Not one is doing that. Once you have those leaders, those elected African American leaders stepping up and speaking out and demanding that the communities that they represent begin a policy of intolerance of this behavior in their community, set up a 1-800 hotline where people can call in and make and identify the perpetrators of these crimes. That's how you stop it. That's how you stop it. But we have this ostrich head in the sand behavior by our legislative leaders, the ones who are supposedly concerned about their communities whenever you have federal troops coming in and doing what they do, or whenever you have a police officer killing someone under whatever circumstances that shooting happens. They're quick to get to a microphone, but the statistics don't lie. And these are consistent year after year after year. And when your race has 13% of the population, but committing between 47 and 48% of the homicides in this country every year, year after year. And we're talking about thousands of deaths, not just a few. We're talking thousands of deaths per year. We're consistently up around, we're talking somewhere in the area of, let's see, anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 deaths a year.
Wow. So I want to talk about some of the drivers of this that, that we really, I think we did talk a little bit about last time, but some of the drivers of what's going on in our communities, basically poverty. It's association between poverty, discrimination, systematic racism, unequal justice system, poor housing, poor education, remnants of slavery, the culture of drugs, guns, violent music, and videos. So those are all areas.
And see, here's the problem with that, Doc. Here's the problem. We constantly keep echoing these same sentiments. I hear it over and over and over again. One of the also thoughts processes I hear is, well, we don't want federal troops because it erodes civil liberties. Well, here's the amazing thing. When you face with a choice, lose some of your civil liberties or lose your life. And this is where we at right now.
That's not a permanent solution. You can't keep them there. You can't keep them there permanently. You need to deal with the underlying causes.
And that's where the underlying come, because now you have to really take a stand to eliminate that problem, my neighbor. We're talking about generational cycle here, what's been formerly called a generational curse. At some point, you're going to have to root out that core of evil in our community and address it. And before we can even get to the point where we can start using counseling, education, better economic factor, you got to keep in mind, career criminals will always be just that, career criminals. At some point, there have to be a firm hand, because when you can't deter by saying, here are the consequences, then you must act. And I believe there is a time to act.
That's not going to change the underlying issues as I stated, that's not going to change.
And what you got to keep in mind, nothing that's been used previously has changed it either.
But
So
those
we
things
can
necessarily
talk
haven't
all
all been
day about it.
addressed.
At some point, you have to get firm. At some point, somebody got to take the responsibility and say, you know what, I'm going to be the one. I understand the history of police abuses. I understand there has been, oh my God, the corruption and the malfeasance of law enforcement agency that really rests on the leadership of those agencies through time itself. But you must understand, at the norm state, those numbers have been consistent. And until we deal with that criminal element with our community, especially where we have to take responsibility and start policing ourselves, those numbers are not going to change.
But I'm saying, as I quoted, the numbers actually seem to be rising. They seem to be rising.
Yes. Yes.
Right. they're
Exactly.
rising.
So now we're seeing a breakdown in law enforcement because now most officers, do you know the exit from law enforcement agencies now has reached a point where it may be critical if this goes on another year or two? Because now, why take on a job where you yourself maybe find yourself convicted and incarcerated for trying to deal with problems within our community? You know, one of the things, it used to be the main thing you had to worry about was coming into law enforcement, the possibility the worst could happen, you'd be killed, and nobody wanted that. But who signed up now with the possibility the very jurisdiction that you sworn to protect and serve may be prosecuting you, even if you perform your duties in the best possibly thinking you were doing right, and they turn around? Throwing officers under the bus is nothing new in law enforcement. And again, leadership changes when always there's so-called a traumatic situation that take place. They just change the head of household, but the culture stayed the same. Poor leadership has always been the underlying factor that created bad law enforcement officers. And we get it, and what I base that on, these departments have mission statements claiming this is what they stand for, this is what they do. They have recruitment units that claim they selected the best officers for the thousands of men and women each year who apply to be law enforcement officers. Well, if your selection is so rigid and the people you selected were that good, then how did they turn bad if you had a good system? Those are basic common sense questions that need to be asked. And yet we don't ask them because we're always trying to look at the educated, rational point of view.
That still doesn't solve like the underlying problems of the issues of particularly among young Black men. And like what we talked about last time, some of the programs, the PAL, the mentoring programs, and they were talking about a program Sunday called the My Alpha Redemption Project in Chicago. It addresses young men between the ages of 18 and 30. And what they do, they provide them coaching, counseling, employment. They work on increasing their self-esteem, their identity and sense of respect. So I think things like that, we need more programs like that that help them realize that they are somebody.
Doc, let me say this. Let me say this from a rational point of view. Do you have any idea how many murders were in Chicago last year?
A lot.
Or forget about last year, last weekend.
I'm like,
or the 4th of July.
15 people that were shot at the funeral home.
The 4th of July.
Right,
and the 4th of July itself. See, we have programs all over. This shirt I'm wearing, I am one of the
that's what I'm saying. Those
youth
kinds of
recycling.
Programs. Right.
But what you keep not understanding, we have these programs nationwide in so many different communities. And it's still, these programs doing their best with short resources and trying to make a difference in those who want to be different.
Right, but Paul, they're not enough. That's how we can address the problem.
But Doc, you cannot ignore the proliferation of gangs. Gangs, especially in the South and suburban America, have proliferated to the point now they outnumber the amount of men and women who we able to change their life with these programs. And that's the reason we keep seeing the rise of these numbers of homicides and major crimes across the country, because the streets, the power of the street, unfortunately right now, is stronger than the power of any program that we have.
Acknowledging, Paul, the underlying reasons. People join gangs for various reasons.
We know what the underlying reasons are.
People join gangs for self-esteem, identity. Yeah. Those are the reasons people join gangs.
Yeah.
those basic
We know what the
issues.
reasons are, but it's not stopping the
No,
homicide.
But
I'm saying no, that's why people join it, for a sense of identification, to be acknowledged, gain what they don't get at
Well,
home.
Doc, we knew that for decades, and it's not stopping the
We're not
homicide.
really addressing those things. That's what I'm saying.
Don't-
There needs to be
All
more
these programs
of a
address these
community,
things, but it
of
doesn't stop
a
gang membership.
public call. There needs to be more of a public health approach, like primary prevention, those types of programs.
Yeah.
Just, bringing law enforcement, that's not going to address the underlying problem.
Yeah.
You're blaming the victim in a sense.
yeah, I think what we have to, what
Yes.
we're missing here
Mhm.
is that, and I'm going to go back to something I said earlier,
Mhm.
because first of all, what's happening now happened in the late 60s also. This is not brand new, but
Exactly.
what needs to happen is, and I'm going to say this again, and I don't want to belittle, our government leaders, local and national, state, they need to begin holding community meetings, educational meetings, where this topic is discussed in that meetings. The people in the community need to feel empowered. The self-esteem issue is so
Yes. Amen.
important. I just made a Facebook posting about a young man that I went to school with, and I won't get into the whole article, but the self-esteem issue is so important, and a lot of times, what it's just a little thing. Someone, if I'm representing a community group or PAL or one of these organizations, not just wait for the people to come to them, to go out in the community and get these people in, have conversations. We used to have safe streets in Philadelphia. It was a government subsidized program where you had people within the community that would go out to where these gangs hung and engage them in conversations, get them into to meetings, and have discussions, show them the opportunities that they can have. Number one, the opportunities for employment, the opportunities for education, joining civic organizations, all sorts of educational and job-related activities to give them a positive alternative for these self-esteem issues that they have. But as long as you ignore that important factor, people will naturally go fade. I don't care whether you're white or black, fade to that lowest level of acceptance.
Exactly.
And the other part about that, and I'm going to get to police and crime, remember always that there's a lot of proactiveness that goes on with police as far as patrol duties go. But in instances of crime, especially black on black crime, white on white crime, however you want to figure it, we are reactionary. We are the after effect.
Absolutely.
And what we're trying to deal with and what we have to deal with is
Being proactive.
doing things,
That's
not
what
the
I'm
police,
saying. Yes,
not the
Paul,
police
proactively.
necessarily, but doing things before. Police presence in the community, yeah, there's been a tendency over the past 30 years, and I was involved in an expose about this, where there have been cutbacks in police service, and those cutbacks usually affect communities that need it most. This is documented, and cops being there, police being there, that helps to stop a lot of stuff. The other part of it is that people taking responsibility for what they do, people taking responsibilities for their communities.
Yes.
Remembering that when there is a proliferation of broken families,
Yes.
with absentee fathers, with parents who are drug addicted or have some other issues where they're not able to properly guide and lead their children.
Exactly.
The absence of adequate teaching and competent teachers in our schools, those things contribute. The one thing that I was talking about was this one kid that I was talking about. He had issues at home, and when you read his story, it's unsettling. But we had a teacher who berated this young boy every single day at school. A teacher who told this boy at 11 years old, you're a bum, you'll always be a bum. You're telling an 11-year-old kid this.
And is this
and eventually what happened is,
a Caucasian teacher?
no, this was an African-American
What?
teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This happened in this would be 1958 or 59. This kid eventually was temporarily saved by boxing promoters who were working at a PAL. And he fled in there because he was being chased one day. And they turned his life around temporarily. He became almost a middleweight boxing champion. Physical problems kept him from attaining that goal, but he was very, 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 very close. And then his rug got pulled out from him. But again, it's about people stepping up and stepping into the communities, mentoring these young people who are in fatherless homes,
Exactly.
showing them positive examples. I was fortunate. The home that I came from, I won't say there was a lot that I liked about my father, but there was a lot that I didn't like. But I was able to focus on people who I looked upon as mentors, people who I was able to look at and say, well, I want to listen to this person. I associated myself with guys in my community and girls also, who had a life plan, who had life goals, who wanted some sort of achievement, who wanted to get out of that ghetto that we lived in. And we wanted to get a piece of the American pie, so to speak. This new opportunity that was before us in the 50s and 60s that we saw looming there. It was still slightly out of reach, but it was attainable through legislation and things that were going on there. And a lot of my neighbors and the people that I associated came out to be very, very successful people. But again, there has to be goal setting at a very young age. There has to be a means to goal achievement that they can see at a very young age. And that achievement is not based on joining a gang. If there's a weakness in your family for lack of a father or lack of a male image that can't lead you, then we need opportunities. We need counseling in those families. Someone needs to reach out and say, we can do something with your son. We had these government programs in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s that addressed these issues. You had Safe Streets program, which is nationwide, and other programs that went into the communities and grabbed these gang members. And I was a part of that, where you get these people in and sit them down in a room and you have conversations with them. You show them opportunities. But then there has to be a willingness and there has to be support. And we're not getting that. Our young people aren't getting that support. They're not getting that reaching out. They're not getting that leadership from the government leaders. They're not getting that leadership also in the home. And Paul mentioned earlier about the preponderance of violent computer games. I remember back years ago, Superfly. Everybody wanted to be Superfly. It was unsettling. I personally protested. I never saw the movie Superfly. I was done after I saw the movie Shaft, because I went to watch Shaft because at that time there were no black movies, nothing that was positive black movies. But I said to myself, nobody that I associated with talks like that. I mean, every other sentence in Shaft was filled with profanity. I didn't associate with people who talk like that. I associate even now. If this is your type of conversation that you want to get into, I can't be associated with you, which plays back into the self-esteem. We have too many of our young people and some of our older people who are into this negative verbiage in their lives, referring to themselves as N's and B's.
Right.
That is a self-perpetuation, denigration of our sense of humanity, looking at one another. And once you adopt that, then you're no longer looking at a person. You're looking at a thing. And through our music that's out there now, through our TV shows, these crazy TV shows that they have on now that are cheaply made, but perpetuate, yes, but they perpetuate a negative stereotype that people seek to achieve those negative stereotypes. That's the damning part of it.
Exactly.
And but we
and
support
the sad part
that.
about it is very intelligent people. You know what I'm saying? The very people in our communities that should be telling the youth. You would think that, oh, well, that's just the young people. No, these are older people, well in their 40s and 50s, who live in this lifestyle and perpetuating. So what is the youth or Generation X supposed to do if they see even their mentors and their elders doing the same thing?
Like you said,
I agree.
more control over the media, more positive images, and just understanding as a culture, right? We're the only culture that self-denigrates ourselves and calls ourselves by these dehumanizing names.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm trying to say, Doc. I understand all the cultural and cycle of problems we have, but at some point, we have to take responsibility for those, and we have to start self-policing ourselves. You know, I'm very hard on police departments that don't believe and follow the benefits of community policing. I believe the only way we're going to get a better public relation, not just on the news and so forth, but also person to person, just getting out there and taking responsibility for these communities as though we lived there ourselves. But when you look at the Black community and what we tolerate and what we do to one another, there's no excuse whatsoever. We all know the factors that have been plaguing us for generations. At some point, when are we going to address it?
Right, but understanding the triggers and the underlying reasons. It doesn't mean it's an excuse. It's just understanding the motivations. Doesn't mean it's an excuse.
But if it's so underlying, Doc, and it's so common, like Norm said, even in the 60s, they had a program to address that. What happened between the 60s and the 90s where that was allowed to do? The fall apart. We already had these problems well before then. And let me tell you one thing that is not factual when it comes to programs like this going over time: consistency. Once we find something or we create something that works, how consistent is it where it becomes a fact of life? When it goes from being a program to a way of life.
Okay, I see. You're wearing the youth recycling. So why don't you tell us about your program?
Youth recycling goes back to what Norm said they had in the 60s. We're actually, as I heard him explain it, youth recycling was created by Lev Wells here in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the main proponents of it is Chief Eldrin Bell, who's the chief of Atlanta Police Department. I have the pleasure of working under these guys. My main job is to really go out there and start educating community leaders, religious leaders, parents, even the young men and women themselves who have become part of the criminal justice system. What we realize is too much of a task, and there's too many so-called programs calling themselves trying to prevent youth from joining these, and they're not working well. We had to focus on that community everybody has abandoned. Those who have already become convicted felons. It's hard for them to get jobs. It's hard for them to get housing. It's hard for them to be good parents because as a convicted felon, even their voting rights have been eroded because of mistakes they made in their youth. We are now working hard to get most of these young men and women mental health diagnosis because a lot of them have undiagnosed mental health problems. We're also helping to get them employment opportunity based upon their education. And not only that, we're also giving them vocational training as well as access to chances now getting GEDs, leading to college education. We're working with a lot of the schools in the area now, the colleges and universities, saying, listen, we have a non-traditional student. Their life experience has been negative. They have had strikes against them, but They're too young to throw away and ignore, and they have too much energy to let them stay on these streets, because with the wrong influence, they're going to become even more of a problem in this criminal crime if we don't take that energy and turn it into something good. Now, understand this. This is the principle of youth recycling, which really works along with Mind Matters. Because think about it. We're not in a position where we're giving them a handout. This is not welfare. This is not WIC. This is not an EBT type program. Why? Because people take it, use and abuse it. This is a hand up. The men in this women in program, it's just like in most of our mental health cases. This is voluntarily. It's a convicted felon. You've already got 3-4 strikes against you. Now we're working within the jurisdictions that you have been convicted. If you really want to turn your life around and be held accountable for your action, then you have to put in the work. We just connect you with the people and the process. In some cases, even when fees are associated with something like getting a record exonerated, or you're in a position where we want to go around and start saying, get with the DAs or whatever jurisdiction and say, hey, listen, can we get an expungement? You know, when we get the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors, as well as the parent and a community together, you'd be amazed now. We can't save everyone, but we can save the ones who want to make a difference to be saved.
Paul, that's exactly what I'm talking about, that kind of
thing. I hear you, Doc.
What's the age range for your program?
But what you fail to realize, what I'm trying to explain to you, just understand. But the agency there's multiple agents between Fulton County, LaSalle County, DeKalb County, and the vicinity of Atlanta. But what I'm trying to explain to you, for those that we make contact is versus the number of those who are enthusiastically joining gang and contributing to our lifestyle that's endangering themselves and others, is so disproportionate. And that's what Norm is trying to say that makes sense. We have programs. This is nothing more than an offshoot of what Norm and they did down in the 60s. Here it is in the 21st century, 2020. We still trying to replicate that, but there have not been consistency.
Okay,
and unfortunately,
Paul, kind of focus on your program. What's the age range so people can know about? What's the age range for your program?
The age range right now is from 17 to infinity. And preferably 18. Why? Because now they're legally to sign and make decisions on their own. But 17, you can now go to adult jail at 17, you know. And we try to go from 18 and focus between 18 and 35, because that's the most critical age group in the Black community.
Exactly. And how does someone find out about your organization or get involved?
Well, I'm glad. And see, and that's the thing about it. We're constantly right now working with between Clayton County, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and the city of Atlanta to already working with our sponsors such as FedEx, UPS, and various corporate sponsors now to really start ramping up this program to be a major institute, because there's so many hurdles to jump through, even in the Black community, because here's the problem with that. You have to get your religious leaders on board. And if it doesn't fit their agenda, they're not going to be there. Your political leaders, again, if there's an agenda, you get a chance for them to get in front of a camera and smile and wave and kiss babies. If it doesn't fit their agenda, they got to be there. How does
somebody get in contact with your organization? How does someone
Well, I am the #1 contact person, Paul DesVignes. My number is 770-294-4985. Between myself and Chief Bell and Mr. Leb Wells, we would not only make contact with the jurisdiction of this young man or woman that you want to sponsor, we will also in the community that they live, we will start looking at who are the council people there, who are the religious leaders. And we would go in there and say, hey, listen, this is what we got that's going on. We start one individual and they will start targeting, or most people come to us all the time and say, hey, I got a nephew, a friend, a cousin, a brother, a sister. They've been through the system. This is what we have. Can you please do something for them? And again, for all our listeners out there in WCEG who have family members or friends or just people concerned, they talk about young men and women who've already been convicted, who are convicted felons, please give me a call at 770-294-4985. We have the resources to get you mental health screening. We have the resources to get you GEDs. We have the resources now to start teaching you vocationary skills and putting together opportunities and programs that you can get job training, that you can get educated. And now we've been working on where we can get a lot of them who are parents, family counseling, not just how to be better parents for their kids, but also how to be better spouses or boyfriends or girlfriends, because the domestic violence in these age groups is just as prevalent as Black on Black violence. So we have necessary means of resolving these issues, but you need people who's in this cycle, the victims themselves, to come forward and say, hey, listen, you know what? I'm a victim of my own stupidity and bad judgment. I made mistakes in my youth that I don't want to destroy my interim age or my senior citizen years because I wasn't able to be a productive citizen.
What does your slogan say? I mean, I can't see, but I know you had your slogan. What does it say?
It says, if you can see, it says youth recycling.
Right, but
Each one, teach one.
See, each one, teach one, yes.
And mind you, the ones who do the teaching are the ones who now have been through the system. The ones who already know the pitfalls of criminal activity, gang life, drug dealing, dysfunctional household, every negative that you stay from socioeconomic to poor family dynamics. It's important to have peer support groups every step of the way for those who claim, well, you don't know what I'm going through. Are you kidding? Every last one of us in this world at some point in time have been subject to the very evils and that others have fallen through the cracks, while we have made different decisions in our life to be here today to sit there and talk about these evidence.
So
and
Paul,
again,
how would you say your organization is different from what's out there now? How are y'all different?
But that's ours is different because we want to work directly with correct convicted felons. We're not anymore, we don't have the resources to want to deter. That's where all your other agencies, where you look at your PAL programs and you look at your, well, we used to have officer friendly back in the day when I was in school, Scared Straight program. Those are all deterrents. We're one of the few programs that now focus directly on the needs of those who've been convicted, those who've already been cast aside as unwanted members of society. We are that voice for those that can't speak.
See, that's what I've been saying all along. That's what we need. Thank you. This is what we need. Things like this.
But Doc,
but you can't hold it. You can't put
I've
down
always
everybody
said
else.
this is what we need.
No, I know, but you have this thing to put down everybody else. So you're the only one. There are other people that are doing things. You can't put down other groups and organizations. We all need many of these kinds of organizations to do this.
But what you fail to realize, Doc,
not just fail to realize. No, I'm tired of that.
Just understand this. There's never been a consistency. As Norm said, they had similar programs that took place in the 60s. Where did we lose that? But I can tell you this, what makes us unique from any other program, all of us are current, former, retired law enforcement officers, from prosecutors to police officers, to the chiefs of police, to investigators. Every last member of Youth Recycling have a law enforcement background. That's what sets us different.
Well, good, but I'm saying
not
what you're
professional
doing,
caseworkers. We're not therapists. We're
right.
the very officers on the street that put these people behind bars in the first place.
Paul, but I'm saying I'm really thankful for what you're doing, but that's what I'm saying. We need, a myriad of programs dealing with your approach, those that deal with the younger people. So we need it all. We need it all. You can't just downgrade all the other, but we need all the programs that we can get.
I have no intent to downgrade anybody. What I'm telling you what our priority is.
Right.
I'm telling you what we are trying to do is be consistent where others have not been.
Okay.
And right now,
I'm saying, but still, you're putting down other programs. Norm had something to say. What did you have to say, Norm?
Well, I really want to go back to the self-esteem. I'm not going to get off of that. One of the things that we had when we were younger, I went to a ghetto school. No air conditioning or anything like that. But we had people like Mr. Mabutu, who came to our elementary school while he was still in college.
Yeah.
And the only people that we ever saw from Africa were so-called natives running around with loincloths. but he came in, this is back in 1956, 57, with his African garb on, and we were all impressed. The other part
Wow.
of that is we were constantly entertained or had people come to our assemblies who were police officers, were military people, who were college educated teachers, who were athletes, who were people who came from our community but achieved success, showing the children that there is a way out of this. And it gave us something to aspire to. And I just want to debate one thing with Officer Paul. When we wait until they're 17, the die has been cast already. And we really need to get to these children long before they're 17. Years ago, we had Head Start for preschool. That was taken away. That was the funding for that was taken away.
Oh, Head
But
Start is no longer, they defunded Head Start? I guess I didn't realize that.
yeah, the Head Start is gone.
Okay.
We don't have Head Start programs anymore.
No, and what that did was that not
Wow.
only gave children an early educational opportunity, it also freed the parents up to go out there, some of the parents, to go out there and get employment rather than be on welfare or some other government benefit agency. I really need to go back to how important it is to have mentoring in our communities, and also people coming in and showing our children, our youth, that there is a way out of this, a positive way out of this, that supplants being in dead-end aspirations such as gang activities. That's a dead-end aspiration of getting involved in the criminal system. Dead-end aspiration, and showing our youth that there's another way. There's another way out than trying to be a rapper. There's educational opportunities out there that are available, and those need to be encouraged and not discouraged. One of the downfalls, even when I was going to school, was counselors telling you, well, you know, I don't think this is a good fit for you, even though this may have been a child's aspiration. I think you need to go over here. We have to stop discouraging, but encouraging, because most people that we know, African American, white, whoever, can achieve, can succeed, but they need to have a way, a route to that. And one of the routes to that is having people support their aspirations and their dreams.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So yeah, we need all to address all aspects: preschool, school age, high school, those that have been in the system. So we need all the input and help that we can get at every age range to deal with this issue. So we need to bring aboard and encourage, you know, all the help that we can get to deal with this issue. So this has been obviously a very lively discussion. And I think, you know, at this point, though, we'll probably just, you know, wind down, because there's been a lot of, as a heated discussion going on here. So I want to thank our co-host, Officer Paul, and our guest, Mr. Norman Carter, for a very lively discussion. I don't know, we may do a part 3 at some point. I don't know if there's enough interest, we'll do a part 3 if needed. But I wanted to thank all of our listeners out there at WCEG. This is WCEG, part of the Worldwide Empowerment Group. And we all thank you so much for listening to Mind Matters. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay.
Hold on, everybody.